this time in my life, I spent 175 days on the ocean point, but it was genuinely scary. You know, you're talking 10-meter waves. So I capsized 3 times in the first 5 hours, and now all of a sudden I wasn't safe.
Welcome to the People of Private Capital podcast. We're delighted to welcome you to this, our very first episode. And what an episode. We have a very special guest, Damian Browne, who is an extreme adventurer. He's a peak performance athlete and international keynote speaker. And he also happens to be from Galway in Ireland, which is an added bonus for us, as a large percentage of our company is based out of Dublin, Ireland. And very proud of Damian and his achievements, many of which you'll hear about in the podcast. Damian started really his professional career as a rugby player. He had a 16-year career. He donned the colours of some of rugby's European elite, including Northampton Saints and Leicester, where he won club rugby's biggest prize, the Heineken Cup. And since retiring from professional rugby, if you can call it that, Damian has become one of the world's foremost extreme adventurers, undertaking some of the most demanding physical and mental challenges on the planet, including the 257-kilometre Sahara Desert Ultramarathon, the Marathon des Sables. He's also climbed 5 of the 7 summits. This is a renowned mountaineering feat, and most recently created history by becoming the first person ever to row from New York City to Galway, taking him 112 days, and in the process becoming one of only a handful of people to have rowed the Atlantic in both directions. Damian's drive to explore his physical and mental limits is not exclusive to ultra endurance events. Rather, he's a multi-time indoor rowing champion, holding all-time, all-category records for the 500 meters and 1,000 meter distances. And Damian is really focused on pursuing his own human potential, relentlessly pushing his body and mind to their perceived limits, forging himself and his character in what he deems a crucible life. And you'll hear some of the detail of that in the podcast. He's going to share with us his unique story, his incredible experiences crossing the Atlantic, and also giving us some insight into ways in which we in the private capital sector can navigate some of the headwinds that we're facing in this market as we head into 2023. So I'm delighted to welcome Damian as our guest, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. All right, Damian. Well, quite an introduction there. You've been busy over recent years post your rugby career. I want to welcome you to the podcast. We had the benefit of spending some time with you at a recent kickoff in Dublin for the company, and I have to say the mood in the room was electric after you spent the hour and a half or so with us. It was right at the opening of the event. We had 3 days after that. And I have to say, I think the session just kind of lifted everybody. We as we spoke about when we met, we're coming into, not just us, but people in our industry are coming into a tough year. And there was a bit of a price correction in the market last year. We're in the software space for the private equity and private markets sector. And of course, the stock market is down and valuations of technology companies are down. And even if you're not in the tech sector, you've seen the layoffs that are happening in technology. And so there's quite a few, headwinds for the sector. And, what I thought was excellent. Thankfully, we had 800% plus growth last year. We've got significant growth ahead of us this year, but not without its challenges. And so part of the reason that, we wanted somebody of your caliber to come in and talk to the team was, how do you handle adversity and how do you handle these challenges? Clearly, we'll be diving in today to some of the challenges that you've taken on, but also, the mindset that's required to deal with that. So I want to thank you before we start here for just an incredible session. It was, so well received. We probably could have had Q&A for another 2 hours after that. But anyway, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Ferdy. Thanks for having me. And it's great to hear that people took something away from our conversation and, that they can, well, firstly, that lifted their energy, and secondly, that they can use going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive in. I want to, I have the benefit of understanding more of your backstory from that session. But, if we go back to let's say, the genesis of what is easily your most notable achievement? There are many that we can talk about. We've mentioned in the opening there, but in particular, the most recent crossing of the Atlantic, rowing from New York to Galway and that entire journey. But I wanted to just step back a little bit. I say a little bit, quite a bit, to the genesis of what I took away from our conversation is almost a transformation of you, physically and mentally at really quite a young age, given your teenage years. And can you give us some insight into what that transformation was about, and what encouraged you as a teenager to kind of make that move to what's led you to where you are today?
So you have to go all the way back to kind of when I was around 14 or 15. I'd started playing rugby maybe since I was 11, so 3-4 years before that. And then 1995 was, around when I was 15, and that was the Rugby World Cup in South Africa. And I was, at that point, very, very kind of interested in rugby, the sport, giving a lot of my time to it. But watching that Rugby World Cup was where the kind of ignition started in terms of what I would deem an absolute kind of passion and obsession, if you want. Just seeing the All Blacks particularly, I was just transfixed by this team in black. That, first game, I don't know if you remember, was against Ireland, and Jonah Lomu came on, burst onto the scene as a 19-year-old and just basically destroyed, literally ran over, half the team. And he subsequently did the same to Wales, Scotland, England, and was eventually kind of curtailed by the South Africans in the final. But yeah, just seeing that was like the start of really what ignited that passion within me. And, fast forward a couple of years, I'm 17. I'm going to school to play rugby more than anything else. And I come off my rugby season in school, and I hadn't played a minute for the senior team. And that was painful. That was, I was by far the biggest, individual on the team. I still had another year left in school. I should have been dominating, and here I was not playing a minute. And that hurt. I was disappointed in myself. I was embarrassed in myself, and, being Irish, I was ashamed. But I was able to funnel that kind of concoction of negative emotion into a positive decision. And I kind of came to the realization, well, you're not fit. And if you're to get fit, and if you're to do something within rugby, and if you're to, do better and play better, well, it's up to you, and go and get fit. So that's simply the decision I made. I took responsibility for that one kind of compartment of my life, which was, my performance in rugby. And I'm back in Renmore here, back in my parents' house right now. So just walked up to Galwegians RFC, which is about 7 or 8 minute walk up the road. One night after that season had finished, the school's rugby season, and I started running, because, 1997, it's not like it is now where you have all this reams of information at the touch of your fingertips. Back then, didn't really know, how do you get fit? The only exposure I had was in rugby teams, and everybody there just ran laps, very old school. So that's what I went up and I did. And the first night I lasted 2.5 laps, but I was back the next night, and the next night, and the next night, and the next night, and every night for about 30 nights straight, kind of wet April here on the West Coast. I trudged around that pitch, and that was the genesis of it. That was the transformation in terms of direction, and it all stems from that decision to take responsibility for something. That's the absolute key piece, to give yourself agency over your decisions, over your actions, over your reactions. So, I literally wired into me at that point, through purposeful action, the rewards of doing something hard and persevering through that hard work to get someplace. So there was great rewards internally, right? Firstly, I was in control now. I was in control, nobody else. I wasn't waiting on somebody else to do something for me. I was doing it myself. I started to gain a bit of confidence, a bit of belief in myself, because I could see myself getting fitter, could feel myself getting fitter. little bit of self-respect. And externally, there was great rewards as well. Started to play better rugby, so much so that like 2 years after that first night, that manky, wet April night, I signed my first professional rugby contract. So I went from not playing for my school's team, under 18, to being a senior professional within 2 years. So like a dramatic transformation, obviously. And that was, that's where it all began.
Incredible. And I mean, physically, you're what, 6'5", 6'6", but you're I know standing beside you for the photograph, I felt, yes, decidedly small, but I mean, as an imposing kind of physical character in your teenage years, did you foresee anything in your future in terms of sport, or was that a complete revelation for you?
Yeah, I was never an athletic person, I suppose what I had on my side was obviously good genetics, just very fortunate there. 6'6", around when I was 17, 18. Okay, I was heavily overweight, but I was still huge. Like, I was like 19, 20 stone, like, what's that, 260, 280 pounds, so that's very, like, that's not usual here in Ireland. So it stood out like a sore thumb. But my great gifts were just work ethic and perseverance, That's what separated me. And that's what I felt I always had to do every single day in training. It was like professional rugby is a ruthless environment. And there's so much, it's such a pressure cooker. So you have your own internal pressures you place on yourself, and you have all the external pressures that the environment and performance places on you. And I played for 16 years. So over 16 years, like, that can either make you or break you, and dealing with those pressures. So one of my kind of great gifts was being able to kind of handle that pressure through always doing more, always looking for more, always understanding that today I have to work harder than anyone else in this place to stay kind of relevant, to stay ahead of the game, to hold my position in the team. I never felt safe, not one moment. Every training session I walked out to, I was nervous. Like I can't fuck up today, kind of thing. So and I dealt with that through work. Building kind of confidence in myself, building belief in myself, building understanding in myself, just through constantly doing more. Like, and I readily admit I did too much at times. Like, there was times where we'd play a game. I can remember when I was playing in Northampton in the Premiership, which is the hardest league in Europe. It's very attritional, week in, week out. And we'd play on a Saturday, and I'd be back in the gym lifting weights on a Sunday. Like, I know there was a point where I felt absolutely unbreakable as a human, and that was around then. But I overdid it, and I didn't recover well. Although my mindset was really like strong, it might have worked against me in some ways in kind of around that period. But we learn and we adapt as we go. But I was always working, and it served me very, very well.
Yeah. And was there any particular influence in your life around that time, Damien? I mean, I have a daughter who's that age at the moment. I know she won't appreciate me saying this, but she is finding her character and, developing her own interests. And then she's a pretty unique character anyway. But it is a very, very, thinking back to when I was that age, very impressionable time. And you are trying to kind of define yourself almost at that age. But external influences can play a part in that. I took up long distance running. I didn't start with long distance running, but I took it up because around that time, Eamon Coughlin was doing extremely well, and he was a character, and there was a couple of other Irish sports stars, and it stuck with me through life and business. That we lived next door to the Bank of Ireland bank manager, and I thought he has a great car and he dresses well, and as a teenager, it's very impressionable, and that's how I got into business. That's how I decided to focus on that. So it's interesting, these small little things that influence you when you're that age. But just wonder, was there any influence or individual or maybe group of individuals that influenced you at that time to make that change or make that move?
Well, definitely coming back to what I mentioned earlier, so that like the All Blacks that time, I can still name that team, like from 1 to 22, but definitely 1 to 15, and Jonah Lomu. And then kind of more locally, Nick Popplewell I was a big fan of the way he played. Obviously, he was from kind of Greystone, and he was over in England playing. He played with Newcastle, so I watched kind of around that time. The Sky Sports started showing the Premiership, and Newcastle were a powerhouse. They had Inga Twingamala on the wing. They had the likes of Doddy Weir, God rest him. These type of guys, very big characters within the sport. So there was Nick Popplewell from, Ireland, and, somebody I'd gone to see in the old Lansdowne Road as a young fella, and really admired. And alongside him, on an even more kind of local level, I had Eric Elwood. So Eric was playing with Galwegians. He just moved back from Lansdowne where he was when he was working, and the game went professional. So he was back in Galwegians, and I had the opportunity, like as a 17-year-old, to train with the seniors, and there was Eric Elwood beside me, and I was like, holy cannoli, it's unbelievable. I'm from Renmore, which is and he's from Merview. So Merview's on one side of Galwegians and Renmore's on the other. So very much similar backgrounds, and here's a guy who's, in the 30 caps for Ireland. He's the out half. He's a big deal. Like, he's talked about a lot, and he's the leader, basically. He's the quarterback on the pitch. So, and now here I am training beside him now with a 17-year-old. So those guys as players, massive kind of emulation towards what they were doing, types of players they were, types of characters they were. And then there was one coach, a couple of years later, I was very, very fortunate to kind of at the age of 18, 19, when I was starting to play senior rugby, there was a coach called John Kingston, who was an Englishman who had been coaching in London with Richmond at the top professional club level there. And Richmond had gone under because of financial stuff. And he was a bit disillusioned with the game. And somehow somebody from Galwegians convinced him to come to Galwegians. So there was me as an 18-year-old just stepping into the senior squad. And there was this amazing coach, good person, amazing coach coming over from England. So he played a huge role in my development at that time, where I was very impressionable, and really kind of molded some of that raw kind of primalness that was inside me, to kind of direct it more towards rugby and get more out of myself, and improve me as a player, and push me and demand more of me, and get more out of me.
Yeah. And so fast forward from 17 then to 19, a couple of years later, you're signing your first professional contract. You had, not to brush over it because it was a decade plus career, right? Can you just talk a little bit about that, and just in the context of what you're doing right now as an extreme adventurer? It seems like quite a move from this team sport to certainly the most recent endeavor, very kind of solitary endeavor. I know you have a team around you, but at the end of the day, it was a solitary endeavor for you. Just maybe talk a little bit about your rugby career and what you took from that. As you, before you, I'll say moving into retirement, but that's, I guess, recently professional rugby, yes, but it's some retirement. But just talk a little bit about that.
A very, very, very fruitful journey. It's like an extraordinary sport in terms of the values it promotes and the values you must live day after day after day to survive and thrive in that environment. I was lucky enough to be involved in some really high level, high standard environments, particularly to Leinster. So I moved to Leinster when I was about 31, played there for 2 years, and it just happened to kind of coincide with the time where, players that had played there their whole life were coming into the kind of the summer maybe of their careers, where they were incredibly experienced and had gone through a lot of heartache and gone through a lot of failures, but stuck in the fight, always striving for more from themselves. And here they were, dominating Europe basically. And I just happened to be lucky enough to sign for them at that point. And when I got to Leinster, I finally felt I'd found an environment that I was looking for, that kind of that had the standards I always demanded of myself, and had the environment that was going to bring the most out of me, and had the players that had a very similar outlook, who were always looking for more from themselves to be a better teammate, a better rugby player, hence a better team. So that was almost like a relief, like finally found this group of players who kind of think similarly to me, and it was a very successful time for the club. You know, that we won a Heineken Cup, we won the league, and we won the Challenge Cup, and then the A team similarly won their league both years I was there. So that was amazing, just to play under Joe Smith and be part of an environment he put together, and also to play with all those players like the likes of Brian O'Driscoll, Leo Cullen, Sean O'Brien. There's so many. I mean, the whole team: Owen Redden, Gordon Darcy, Rob Kearney. You know, just like an amazing kind of people, firstly, and great rugby players, and to see, you know, what they demand of themselves, what they demand of the team, how they do that, you know, how selfless some of them are. It was fantastic. Yeah. Now, throughout this whole kind of rugby career, I was always very self-motivated, self-driven, self-propelled. I never really needed, as I mentioned earlier, too much prodding. I'd always figure it out myself, and that meant that I was always looking and my foundation was like the strength and conditioning side of it. So whenever kind of performance dropped, I'd go back to that, and I'd start working on the things that were in my control. And throughout that, I made some really good relationships with strength and conditioning coaches. But I also went outside the environment, was always reading and researching and trying to figure out why I was doing what I was doing, what would be possibly better, how I could use what other people were doing in physical pursuits to get the most out of themselves. You know, so that could have been as broad as the kind of, you know, people in like powerlifting for maximum strength, or bodybuilding for putting on as much muscle mass as possible. Both things would aid me in being a better rugby player. Or like ultra endurance running, and what people were doing to kind of manage their mind in those epic endurance events. So if I felt somebody had some processes or information that I could use to be better, well, then I was going to try and find it. What that did was that aided me incredibly well in what I've gone into now. So like I now, and have for the last kind of 7 years, as an extreme adventure, I've put together all my own training programs, and I'm able to kind of constantly iterate them through like the knowledge I've gained through rugby, and subsequently through just various kind of self-propelled studies off the back of that. So that's the main piece, like, and that's a huge component of kind of why I feel I can be the best in the world at what I do, because I have this incredible connection with my body and the biofeedback that gives me all the time, with my mind, because I've been living in it, like paying attention to what a physical action does for the last 25 years, like since I was 17. And then I've gained all this knowledge as well through kind of study, research, trial and error, in terms of what works for me. So I feel I can put myself into physical and mental conditions to take on whatever the hardest challenges are on the planet, and put myself in the best position to overcome them, at least. So, and that's all stemmed from rugby.
Yeah. And one of the things that kind of struck me when we last spoke, you mentioned crucible moments and the concept of the iron mind, the mindset, which clearly you took a lot from your rugby career, you know, forward to this next stage, as you say, over the last 7 years or so. And so just to kind of delve into that period. So what started out, it sounds like, as a personal endeavor, you know, the desire to scratch some itch that you had around exploring, and have you evolved into something more. Can you just talk about how things evolved to the point that they're at now?
I think it's connection with what you're feeling, right? An action, a physical action, particularly at the edges of your capacity, what that elicits within inside you, and being able to deal that moment. I call it the decisive moment, where you come to a kind of a nanosecond where within this maelstrom of the kind of the residue of extreme physical push, you get a moment where your mind always just wants to stop. It wants to quit. It wants to do anything within its power to stop that discomfort, that pain, whatever you want to call it. And in that moment, there's so much power and richness held in being able to make the right decision for you and what you're trying to do to continue, to be able to control your mind in that moment. And that's kind of where I have, that moment creates these paradigm shifts, because if you make the right decision and you persevere through it, and then you finish whatever you were trying to achieve, you have literally expanded your mental and physical capacities. So all of a sudden you've gone a step further than you perceived. And that shakes the foundations of your kind of perception and your outlook. And you go, well, if I can do that there, why can't I continually keep doing that and continually push my boundaries and continually improve? It just opens your mind. And those moments continually lived and overcome, and sometimes not, sometimes failed, but came back at them, hold myself accountable, and come back and put myself in to go expose myself to that kind of moment again and get through it. It just, it's incredible in its rewards and how that kind of opens up your mind to the possibilities of more, that there's always more within us. And, you know, that kind of realization, first of all, discovery, and then realization of those moments has kind of propelled me into a path of continually looking for ways to expose myself to it because of the growth within it and the attributes needed to be able to overcome, like self-awareness, to be able to overcome those moments. And they translate so well into everyday life. Like, so yeah, that's kind of the essence of really down to like moments, why I do what I do. And I like to, at least in my training preparation periods for something, I at least want to be hitting on one of those pushing into those moments. So it takes a lot because it's right at the edge of your capacity. So you're kind of looking at it every, 4 weeks, and then maybe every 3 months as well within the program, building up to being able to, because it takes a lot of emotional energy and mental fortitude to be able to impose those moments on yourself, because your body doesn't want it and your mind doesn't want it. So it'll look for ways to avoid it. So you need to obviously just expose yourself to them when you are in a position to kind of take them on with terms of emotional energy. So it kind of, that's what I just feel like, there's a certain part to me is like you discovered something that has to be shared. It's like I discovered a secret that like literally makes like life easier, because the more you expose yourself to those moments and kind of get through them, the more strength you grow, the broader outlook, the more you deepen your understanding of your mind and your body. And so I want to share it, so that's kind of the next step for me is to kind of try and find a vehicle to genuinely teach people, to expose people to those moments and teach them to control their minds, because it's just a case of mental organization when you're in those positions. So yeah, that's the next big thing for me, like the next big step, if you want. I've kind of fashioned out loads of processes and mental methods that I can teach that can help people get more out of themselves and hopefully more out of life.
Yeah. Well, we might dive into a few of those moments now. I know that, and I was fascinated. I listened to your podcast and just to try and get some insight, into the thinking around that constant exposure to, as you say, experiences that are at the edge of most people's existence, and the pathways, I guess, that get developed over time that make you not just handle them better, but even, I won't say necessarily enjoy them, but grow from it. And so when we look at, and we're zoning in on just one of your many achievements as an extreme adventurer, we talked at the outset about the Marathon des Sables and the various 5 of the 7 summits that you conquered. But zoning in on your most recent project or expedition, which was crossing from New York to Galway. Can you just talk about the genesis of that idea with yourself and Dusty, and then perhaps we could dive into the expedition itself and how that progressed and how it finished?
Well, I rode from east to west as a solo in 2017, 2018, crossing over from December 17 to February 18. Took 63 days. I went from the Canary Islands to Antigua. Same distance, kind of 3,000 nautical miles. Incredible experience. And during that, I knew I'd do it again. I knew I'd do another ocean row. I took so much from it. It was incredibly challenging, and hence there was incredible rewards. So something that came up in terms of, you come to a time where you start thinking, well, what could be next, was the North Atlantic. And my whole mindset is I want it to be hard. I mean, that's a kind of, that can be hard for people to understand. Sometimes it can even be hard for me to understand, but it's within those moments of genuine difficulty, genuine challenge, like where you are full of doubt, where you're full of negativity, where there is extraordinary opportunity and extraordinary rewards if you can get through them. And sometimes there's no perfect way. It's just about finding a way through those moments. So when I come to what's next, I'm thinking, I'm not interested in going over old ground. Like that's pointless as far as I'm concerned. It has to be more challenging. What's more challenging than the southern North Atlantic, if you get me? Well, the northern North Atlantic, the opposite way, west to east. So that was kind of where the idea came from. And then, why, if you think of it, so it's New York to Galway. I could have decided to go from St. John's in Canada. That would have saved us over 1,000 kilometers in terms of rowing, but that's not the point either. I genuinely want to get to the other side of these things with no questions in the back of my mind going, hang on though, you did the North Atlantic, but you took 1,000 kilometers off it because you went from St. John's. I want to be in a position, if I achieve what I want to achieve, that there is this kind of inner peace within inside me, because I know I did it as hard as it could possibly be. I know I did it as raw as it could possibly be. And I know I lived up to my standards and values under the extreme duress of as hard as it can be. So that was kind of why we went from New York. There was some other factors, of course, Ireland, New York, incredible connections. The first ever ocean row was across the North Atlantic from New York to England. And so there was historical connection. So it was just great, like, what's the word I'm looking for? There was great kind of synergy with New York, like, just so connected with my beliefs, my philosophies, the history of ocean rowing, and the history between the two countries, So for me, it was always New York and it was always Galway, because I'm from Galway, and I saw that as an amazing opportunity to, make an impact on the streets I grew up on. Like I saw it as a part of my legacy, that I would be able to do something extraordinary, and I'll be able to show people, because there's so much words now, there's so much hot air. It's easy, right, to say things and not do it nowadays, but you can't fake rowing across the Atlantic. That's as real as it comes, And so here is an opportunity for me to literally show people somebody striving for more from themselves, trying to get more from themselves, their mind, their body, their life. They can literally see it happening. They'd see me row into Galway, and imagine that could easily elicit some kind of energy, some type of reaction in somebody, for them to question, well, if he can do it, I can do it. He's got the same 24 hours I've got. He breathes the same oxygen I do every day. Why can't I reach for a little bit more from myself? Why can't I chase my dreams in whatever avenue of life that is? And I think there's something really beautiful in being able to do that with your time on this earth. So that was a massive kind of part of the puzzle that just seemed so right, that New York to Galway kind of thing, and the ocean row, the difficulty of it.
Yeah. And so as you progressed into, starting the expedition, leaving New York, with Gussie, the original intent was that you would both, it would be a duo. Can you just talk about how that progressed and how it became, this really gargantuan single effort that that got you across?
So yeah, the idea as well, and one of those other kind of, to come back to your last question, what are the other factors in my decision to not do it solo, if you want, was because I'd done the solo thing before. I got a lot from it, but what else am I going to get? What other kind of, what am I looking for here in terms of the experience? Well, growth, right? So one of the things I thought would be an amazing opportunity to grow from was to be the leader of a team, if you want. Okay, the smallest team possible, a team of two, but still to lead that and learn through that experience, under those stresses. So it was decided. And so my friend Gussie Farrell came on board, and Gussie has his own kind of story to tell around what's happened to him over the last 5 years in life. But to give you a kind of overarching kind of view on that, he had a workplace accident where he ended up paralyzed below his belly button, and he was rushed to the Mater Spinal Unit in Dublin, and he had surgery. And he came out of surgery and he was told that he had about a 5% chance to ever regain any sensation below his belly button. And if that was to happen, if he was to regain that 5%, he had to start to feel something somewhere below his belly button in the first 7 days. And if he didn't, it's probably never going to happen. 6 weeks later, he's felt nothing. He's down in the hospital here, the regional hospital in Galway, and he gets a little tiny, or at least what he thinks is a little tiny tweak of sensation in his big right toe that he was concentrating on. He calls the nurse. The nurse says, "I think it is." The consultant comes in the next day, and he says that's most unexpected. And Gussie went on this incredible journey then to regain sensation, full sensation, below his belly button, and then went into the National Rehabilitation Hospital in Dublin, in Dún Laoghaire, on the flat of his back, and then walked out 4 months, 16 weeks later. Now, very, very shaky, but that was the commitment he made to himself. So I saw a lot of values, obviously, I was pretty close to that journey, and I saw a lot of values in him that I knew I could rely on. So hence why I asked him to do it. I suppose what I didn't foresee really was his, the extreme of the New York to Galway route. Like it's literally up there with the hardest thing two people can attempt on the planet, and the effects that would have on his compromised physical state. Like, so although he's come an amazingly long way, clearly it was still, it was a huge ask for him, and we probably needed another year of physical preparation to put him in a position to really take it on. And to give people a kind of a look at that, so the first week of an ocean row is incredibly stressful because your body's going from a environment it's habituated to living in to an environment it's not in any way used to living in, right? And so there's a lot of adaptations that are taking place in that first week. Then you throw into it the fact that you're probably not sleeping very much because of the fact, the reality of an ocean row is you row in 2-hour blocks. So I row, you row, I row, you row, I row, you row. So you don't get a lot of sleep. Your body's used to sleeping kind of 6, 7, 8 hours from whenever, in nighttime to morning time. Now all of a sudden you're trying to force it to sleep at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 8 o'clock in the evening, 12 o'clock at night, and you're only getting these 1-hour blocks. So you don't sleep a lot. So when you should be recovering, you're not getting that block of sleep to recover. And then the rowing becomes harder. I had a very, very aggressive mindset, kind of a mindset that I suppose I walk around with generally of non-acceptance, so that first week, like the traditional thinking would be when you hit headwinds of a certain speed and the boat slows to a certain speed, that you put out the power anchor and you rest. And I was absolutely adamant that unless we were going backwards, if we were making any sort of ground, it didn't matter, because if we're making half a knot an hour, that means we're going to make 12 hours in a day. Okay, that's like absolutely, terrible distance, on average, but it still could be the difference between success and failure. So I drove us incredibly hard like that first week, because if you look at the stats of the North Atlantic, it's got a 39% success rate from about 90 attempts. And if you delve into that further, you'll see that about 85% of the people who fail in the first 7 days. So my whole outlook, my whole mindset was, I don't care. If we make this boat go forward, and as I said, 12 miles forward could be the difference between success and failure. So we're not stopping. So it was incredibly arduous first week, no sleep, unbelievable physical demands, lots of headwinds, lots of trials. And I think it all just accumulated in Gussie's body shutting down on day 13, basically. Day 12, he just had extreme exhaustion. He is also another factor, just to give people one more little thing that might kind of bring them into the actual reality of the expedition. So it's summer in North America, right? We left in June. So it's hot during the day. It's like 30 degrees when you're rowing. When you get into the cabin to try and get some sleep, it's about 45 degrees, because you can't have those cabin hatches open. So you're trying to sleep basically in a sauna. And yeah, you're in that whole adaptation. So yeah, like there's no, so Gussie's whole outlook would have been, and it's probably something I should be aware of next time, but his whole outlook would be, okay, I row 12 hours a day, but I get to go into the cabin and have a sleep and rest. And then, when that's not happening, there was a bit of kind of panic and realization of the difficulty of an ocean row. So yeah, it all just accumulated on day 12, day 13, him having to be medically evacuated because of, danger to life, really. His O2 saturation levels dropped to 86. And from his experience in the Mater post-surgery, he had something similar happen where his O2 sats dropped below 90 and he was rushed into ICU because that was a major indicator for blood clotting in his lungs. So, the minute he told me that, I was like, it wasn't my decision to make. It was the doctor, our support doctor back on land, but I just knew that there was no choice here. Like he had to get supplemental oxygen. There's none on the boat, so he's going to have to be medically evacuated. And that, yeah. So that left me alone, 2,500 nautical miles to go, and just daunted by the workload. I was aware of the North Atlantic and its standard conditions, and I knew now that the boat, it was going to be hard for two of us, and because the boat goes, because of those conditions, headwinds and all that, and certain currents. So, now the boat was not going to be going forward 24 hours a day. At best, it was going to be going forward 12 hours a day. So there was another 12 hours where, the boat was going to be at the mercy of the elements, and those elements were not in my favor. So yeah, as you mentioned, it turned into a bit of an epic expedition because of that.
Yeah. And so I want to talk about some of the most, say, difficult challenges that you've had, but that must be up there with, one of the moments in the expedition that, you really have to, well, first of all, decide, what you're going to do and are you going to move forward, if you're going to move forward. Just, can you talk a little bit about your mindset at that time when you find yourself 13 days in, Gussie has been airlifted, you're on the boat alone, and, as you say, still the bulk of the journey ahead of you. What was going through your mind and how did you kind of rationalize, right, I'm going to do this?
I had a job to do as far as I was concerned, and it was incredibly important to me and meaningful to me. So that meant that my mindset was kind of like, well, I need to crack on here. I need to get going. So there was a moment of, not a moment, but a couple of hours where it was, we were going through that whole process. It was very sad. It was heartbreaking when after the doctor had made the call, Gussie was upset. I was upset. We'd done a lot of preparation together. then I started to, as I mentioned, contemplate like what's ahead for me, and the dauntingness of that, and the fear involved in that. So something I'm very aware of is that fear can manipulate and corrupt your thoughts very, very, very quickly, and very unbeknownst to you, at a kind of really sneaky low level. And it can, stories start to be generated and created that are very destructive through that fear. So, how I deal with that is approach. I take the unknown, or at least I try take the unknown out of the fear. So I was very fearful of like what was coming and the difficulty of that, and I wanted to approach it to kind of get out of that state. So that meant Gussie had to get off the boat, and it had to happen as quickly as I could possibly kind of make it happen. And not that I had any role in that, but I was just anxious then to kind of crack on and get into the daunting workload and experience it, and take the fear out of it, take the possibilities of that corrupting my decisions. So yeah, I was kind of single-minded then. It was like, right, I need to crack on here. I need to crack on. And we had very, very good conditions actually at those 2 days, 12 and 13. We just got into the Gulf Stream. So that was a big carrot of, it's this big band of currents that runs up kind of the east coast of America and out into the middle of the Atlantic. And that's a huge goal of that first couple of weeks, is get into that. And we just got into it, and now this was happening. And, I was losing ground, and losing time, and losing a valuable resource, or the power of a valuable resource. So it was like, I need to get kind of him off the boat now, and crack on. So yeah, so I became quite like focused on that, and then just cracking on. And then when we got him off the boat, eventually I just started to row, and I rowed like really, like had a really good day that day, like about 100 miles nearly. Amazing, like for a solo, it's like phenomenal. But then the emotional crash kind of came. It was like there was a hangover of him leaving, that I almost wouldn't let kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I wouldn't let it kind of start. I wouldn't let it kind of get into me that day, but it came a couple of days later. And then there was a tough week, I must say, emotionally tough week, kind of that third week. So yeah, just dealing with that. It was almost like a kind of grieving period for losing Gussie. The rowing became very difficult as well, which definitely didn't help the internal state. But after about day 20, 21, I kind of came out the other end of that. And then, it was an acceptance basically of, well, it's all, you're on your own now kind of thing. Yeah. So, in terms of a kind of mindset, just always very focused on what I was trying to achieve, and what that would do, kind of the importance of that, the why behind that, and then that focus bringing me into the kind of the things I had to concentrate on to make it happen.
Yeah. And so, Ed, you're battling through. There was obviously an extension to the time period now for the expedition, because it was one man's effort as opposed to two. And so, how is that playing on your mind? I mean, I'm fascinated by first of all, the amount of time that you've got in this situation. I mean, it's day after day, week after week, in the most challenging, physical circumstances, and I'm sure at times, frightening circumstances if you've got challenging, sea conditions to deal with. And how do you handle that? Just what's there must be, I'm sure, moments of challenge and moments where you kind of question, like, how did I sign up for this? Or what is it about me that drives me to put myself in these circumstances? What kind of conversations do you have with yourself kind of mid-Atlantic that you can share?
There's a few different leverages, I would say, mental kind of perspectives that you have to take, or concentrations that you have to take to get through the consistent and ever-present state of frustration, agitation. That borders over then, the harder it gets, every day is frustrating, and Ocean Row is just uncomfortable. And when your intention is to get to the other side as fast as possible, um, it's hard not to be frustrated every day because of the challenges that come your way. You're constantly battling this fight, this monster, this entity that you can never win. Like, and the way I describe it sometimes, it's like a cat with a little ball of wool, and it's just batting it over and back, and you're the ball of wool, and that cat at any time can just go boom, and you don't have any choice in the situation. So there's always this kind of awareness of the power of the entity that you are dealing with. And sometimes she shows her kind of her cards, and those moments they can be, at least on this crossing, they can be scary. Like I had one day in particular. At this time in my life, I've spent 175 days on an ocean rowing boat, 162 of them alone. And this one day was day 24 on this crossing, where it was genuinely scary. A big tropical storm coming off kind of the east coast of America, just downgraded from the tropical storm about 24 hours before it hit me. And, you're talking 10-meter waves, gusting at max gusts at over 50 knots. So that's touching about 100 kilometers an hour. And you're in this little 6.2 meter ocean rowing boat, So I capsized 3 times in the first 5 hours. I was forecast to be a 20-hour storm. And I shouldn't have capsized because I was on a thing called power anchor, which is a sea anchor you use when, you can't use a traditional anchor because of the, depth of the ocean. And that should have held me upright in those conditions. But all of a sudden, it hasn't. So that adds an element of confusion, right? Because you had this information and now it's disturbed. And then next thing on the capsizes as well, I got water ingress. So I had some water come into the cabin, and that's not meant to happen. So you have these two kind of very disturbing actions that have happened. So your kind of belief, like my belief in terms of what, before I started this ocean row, is whatever comes my way, if I'm in that cabin and both cabin hatches are fully sealed, I'm safe. And now all of a sudden I wasn't safe, right? Because there's water coming in, water can fry the electrics. Do you fry the electrics, it's game over. And why am I capsizing on power anchor? I shouldn't capsize. I've never heard of anyone capsizing on power anchor. But that belief is compromised, right? It's rocked. And I've got another 15 hours of a 20-hour storm to get through. And then you're just lying there, powerless, helpless, just waiting for the next capsize, like waiting for the reality to come, or at least what you deem the possible reality to come. Now, in this case, it actually never happened, but it didn't make those next 15 hours not the longest of my life, if you get me. Like, they were just like minutes felt like hours. I'm not even too sure what I was saying to myself to get myself through it, but I got through it. I think it was just something along the lines of, this will end at some point. I just hang in and just get through it. But so that's kind of the extremes of an ocean row. There was also some of the other challenges I faced was just going backwards all the time. I reckon I went backwards somewhere in the region of about 500 nautical miles over the course of the whole 112 days. So, as I say, 2 or 3 days of every time you drop the oars going backwards is tough. Like, it's tough. 60 days of it is absolutely just soul destroying. So, excuse me. So it was just in moments like that, there was a couple of things I really leveraged, and that was kind of, so why? So the purpose of what I was doing and the imagery around that, the imagery of rowing into Galway, the imagery of the Aran Islands. I called it the bonfires of Aran. That imagery was very positive and gave me energy to get through those moments. Second thing was perspective. Very easy when things are hard and things are difficult and things are challenging to get sucked into this kind of what I call first level thinking. You just can't stop thinking. You can't stop being a victim. You can't stop kind of loathing your misfortune and concentrating on things that are not in your control and not serving you mentally. So it's just about raising my kind of overarching view, my outlook on why I was actually doing what I was doing, and seeing what I had and appreciating what I had and not what I didn't have. So like some of the things I'd say to myself is like, well, are you loved? Yes. Are you supported? Yes. Are you safe? Yes. Can you be comfortable? Is it comfortable? No, but can you get comfortable? I can get comfortable. I can form a way in the cabin to get reasonably comfortable. Have you water? Yes. Have you food? Yes. Many people in the world don't have food, and you have it here. So it was just kind of bringing my concentration to what I had and not what I hadn't. And that perspective brings gratitude. You're like, well, you know what? It's not so bad. It's not so bad. Also, do you want to be here? Yeah, I want to be here. I've not put myself here by accident. Like, this is exactly where I want to be right now. And I'm grateful for the challenge. I'm grateful for the opportunity to grow from these immense challenges. So that, being able to bring myself to that perspective really helped. And the last thing then was just concentrating what's within my control. There was one period I got to, so milestones are really important. And I think we talked about this when we met last in Dublin, but I got to the 500 nautical mile milestone, if you want. And that's a big one, right? So I've only 500 to go, 2,500 done. Brilliant. Little bit of a celebration. It's important to kind of give yourself a moment to appreciate these smaller moments in the big scheme of things. Then it's very much, you still got 500 to go. What's the next milestone? I was counting down at 400 blocks at that point. So an average day on the Atlantic, average conditions, not good, not bad. You're talking you'd be aiming for 40 miles. You'd be kind of content with 40 miles a day. So that meant when I placed the 400 nautical mile goal, or as my next kind of milestone to get that, I was thinking that'll take me 2.5, 3 days. It took me 13 days. I just got so unlucky with weather and currents and that's rowing 11 hours a day here. That's not, I'm not messing around here.
Yeah.
I'm really, really working hard. And, one of those days for 11 hours work, I made 2 miles. Another day I made 4 miles. Another day I made 7 miles. Another day I made 8 miles. It's just soul destroying, just crushing. And when I reflect on what got me through that period, it was just being able to redirect my mind away from things that are outside of my control to things I could control. And I had 3 kind of mental resets I wrote on the cabin that helped direct my thinking to a action within my control. And when I concentrated on that action, then I neutralized my mind because I was present and concentrated on that action. Those resets were, is this quality work? Is my effort honest? And am I concentrating on an action within my control? And whenever I recognized, whenever I became aware that my mind was in a place of negativity, or, whatever verb you want to put on that, self-destruction, chaos, even at times, despair, it was just about redirecting it by asking myself one of those questions, or all 3 of them. And then, if I ask myself, is my effort honest? Well, then I can concentrate on my effort and how much effort I put through the oars, generate through my body to propel through the oars is always within my control. So once I start concentrating on that action that's in my control, then I disperse. I leave that place of negativity and the wash that it's having over me, and I bring myself to a place of neutrality because I'm in this concentrated state, because I'm present. And when you're present, you cannot be anything but present. So it was just about being able to control my mind in those moments. And that's what those 3 things were really powerful leverages for me to use.
I'm trying to get you to, well, we're coming towards the end of the journey then. So just before we get onto that, one of the questions that team member asked after your last session, and I want to put it
a journey.
It wasn't your, but it was, It was Alberto. Alberto was one of our Italian colleagues, and Alberto, in typical Italian style, said, of course, there's lots of challenges and lots of, that's really the central theme, right? Overcoming these huge challenges. But there must have been moments of beauty or joy in the role, and just asked me to kind of put that question to you. Were there any that kind of stand out to you over the course of that journey? That when you look back, you think, wow, that was, incredible.
The one that really jumps out, so it's always connected with wildlife and having the, I suppose, privilege of experiencing wildlife in its kind of natural habitat a million miles from anywhere. And there was numerous kind of encounters with whales that were, I had one encounter on my previous role, and it was really a big kind of hope of mine that there would be more in the North Atlantic, and I got what I really hoped for. There was moments where, there was days in rows where you'd have pods of whales coming by. There was one day where I heard a noise on my right, and you're hyper alert out there. So anything different that you're not used to hearing, you're on it like a shot because it's a threat, or at least it could be. And I was expecting, most of the whales were pilot whales, which are kind of smaller whales, not much bigger than a dolphin, maybe like 3 times the size of a dolphin. So I heard the whale and I kind of looked over and expecting it to be another pilot whale, which is cool. And I saw the kind of grey back rise. And then my expectation was it would disappear because it's a smaller whale. And it just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. And it was just ginormous whale, compared to a pilot whale. So I just remember what that, the emotion that brings out, that kind of melange of amazing kind of emotion that an encounter like that at least elicits in me. And then the other one was a very, very calm day, kind of close to halfway, so somewhere in the 40s, kind of baking hot, unusually calm. And it's actually not people generally don't like those conditions to row in because there's no forward momentum, but I enjoy them. I don't mind. I make good ground those days, so I'm churning away on the oars and kind of in a good zone. And I've been hearing this noise all morning, like this kind of, and it sounds like it's quite normal, because it sounds like breaking waves, which is the sound you hear 95% of the time. But today it's flat calm, so there's no breaking waves. Yeah. So I'm like, what is that? And it took a while for that to actually trigger, that there's no waves and that's not waves, basically. I was like, I don't know what that is. And I looked around, nothing. I kept rowing. About an hour later, the noise is kind of slowly growing. And it started to feel like it was close. So I got up again out of my seating position. It was coming from behind me where I was going, and looked around. And then I could kind of see something on the horizon, a bit of movement. So I kind of stayed there. I even got my camera out at one point just because of what is this coming at me. And then I could see something more clear, like the top of the ocean moving, like an actual wave coming at me. But it didn't look like a wave, but it kind of looked like a wave, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Came to a point then when I got into focus, that's dolphins. And it was about 600 meters wide, this giant school of dolphins kind of breaking, the way they kind of come up and out of the water, breaching the water as they swim. And that was what was making the noise. And there must have been close to 1,000 of them. And they were migrating, some were obviously. And then they eventually came, and then they kind of passed the boat either side underneath, 300 meters that way, 300 meters that way, just hundreds of them. So that was absolutely incredible. I was like never heard of anything like that. Just to have the opportunity to experience something like that, it's absolutely incredible.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, I know Alberto will be delighted with that. He's a surfer and very, very much into his sea life as well. So I appreciate that. Well, look, coming towards the back end of the journey now, and as you say, you've got this kind of mental image of the fires of Arran, and just talk about, as you start to approach the end of that journey, right up to, the end of it, and how that came about. Can you talk us through that experience? Because it's incredibly dramatic.
Yeah, sure. That whole last 6 days, I think it was, is just crazy. I found myself about 115 miles from the west coast of Ireland, directly opposite kind of Connemara, maybe a little bit north of the Aran Islands. So in great position, forecast is pretty good. And next thing I know, I'm getting blown southeast by these northwesterly winds kind of coming from Iceland direction out of nowhere. So there was no rowing I could do. I had to just put out the power anchor again, and I spent 84 hours on power anchor as I got blown and blown further south to a point where I eventually it passed, those winds changed and it calmed, and I was about 30 miles, 32 miles from the Blaskets and Skellig Michael. I could see Skellig Michael. So that was my first sighting of land. But I couldn't, okay, it's great, right? Finally, I've seen land. But land is also a threat in an ocean longboat. And I had these westerly, I had the forecast for the next 2.5 days was you have about 30-hour window before you get these force 9 winds from the west. So blowing east, so blowing me onto the coastline of Ireland. And now I can actually hit something. Sometimes in the middle of the Atlantic, I wouldn't take a huge notice of that because it's actually blown me east and I want to go east. So it does what it does. But now there's Ireland, there's rocks, there's kind of massive danger. So I had 30 hours to, basically I said to myself, you can't sleep. Like, you got to get far enough north so that you clear the Dingle Peninsula within that 30 hours. And then you're going to have to get through another storm. But what clearing the Dingle Peninsula brought was kind of safety, because now instead of, the land cuts back into kind of North Kerry, Limerick. So instead of only having a narrow kind of section between me and rocks, now I had this much broader section. So it would take a lot of the stress out while I endured that force 9 storm. So that I had to tread a really thin line that night, getting into kind of when the winds are picking up into force 6, force 7, force 8 before they kind of hit the peak of the storm, because I still hadn't got far enough north. What that meant was I'm getting all this weather on one side of my boat, like all these waves, from the winds picking up and they're generating these big waves. So those waves are a threat to capsize all the time. It's pitch black, there's no moon, and I'm just getting these waves on my beam. And if I capsize, the chances are I'll break an oar. And if I break an oar, that's the end of the expedition, because I've only 2 left at this point. But I still wasn't far enough north, so I had to kind of continue, try and get north. Because if I don't get north, I'm going to probably be pushed onto the rocks during the storm. So I just kind of literally every second reevaluating, okay, let's keep going, let's keep working. And then there was a moment of say 5 to 10 minutes where I took 3 waves over my right hand side and got knocked off the seat. And I kind of had to just kind of accept that it's too dangerous now to keep rowing. You're about, I didn't know, of course, but my thinking was you're going to be capsized in the next 10 or 15 minutes in these waves. So I had to store the oars, keep them safe, lock down the boat, and I got into the cabin, and I still wasn't far enough north, and I just had to hope that now it was very, very close. So I just had to hope that Mother Nature was going to give me a little bit of helping hand. And thankfully she did. Even though I sat in the cabin and I wasn't rowing, she blew me just about far enough north where I could then put out the power anchor, and then I had enough space, if you get me, not to be on land. So I'm not even anywhere near the Aran Islands at this point, but I spent, I think, another 26, 27 hours on power anchor. Then I actually got very close to land. At one point, it was only 3 miles away from land. And I was like, even though the conditions weren't great, I was like, I have to get out and row now. Now I knew they were going to change in the next few hours. So I rowed in really difficult conditions for a few hours, and then it cleared and calmed. And then I had about 24 hours, I think, to get north before we had these big southerly winds kind of kick in. And that, that wasn't a scary forecast, because I was going north anyway. So these southerly winds were going to help me. I just needed to make sure I was far enough away from the Clare coast. So once I got around Loop Head, which is the kind of bottom of Clare, I just had to make sure I'm nowhere near the things like the Cliffs of Moher and all that coastline, which is treacherous, So I kind of headed out into the Atlantic. And then those winds kicked in, and they meant this just extraordinary few hours, or I would say maybe 8-9 hours of like getting to the Aran Islands and then traversing the Aran Islands. So I ended up kind of been blown through. I was obviously directing the boat, but those winds helped me go through Inishmaan and Inisheer, which is a thing called Foul Sound. Now, if you were on a boat and you're looking at Foul Sound and the two islands there, you'd say like that's a decent gap. I'll get through that handy enough. It's not like particularly wide, but straight down your grand. When you're in an ocean rowing boat, you've got your back to it and you're in 4 or 5 meter waves, and you understand that because they're so steep in those around land, because the waves generate in shallow water, they become quite steep. That's how we can surf and hence things like that. So they're really dangerous, and any miscalculation of direction in the boat can mean it'll just throw the boat sideways at the bottom of a wave, and then you're a thing called beam on, you're sideways on, and then you're highly susceptible to capsize. So that all means that gap is actually particularly small, so I haven't seen people in 99 days at this point. I have a support boat with the documentary crew, with the photographer Amelia. I have the ferries are redirecting themselves from Doolin and Rossaville. They came by and kind of circled the boat a few times. The little Cessna flew over the top, the little hop from Invern to the islands as well. So there's a lot going on for me, and the bonfires are roaring on the islands. It's an incredibly exhilarating, exciting, nerve-wracking, tense few hours. So I finally got through the island and everybody disappeared and I was alone and had a beautiful moment to myself again, to kind of just, because I finally in Galway Bay, right? Galway Bay always, to me, my belief was it was safe. And once I got into Galway Bay, got through the islands, I'm home. I've rode on the islands so many times. I know this. I mean, I don't know much about the North Atlantic, but I know Galway Bay pretty well. So I'm sure I'll be fine in Galway Bay. And I never even thought of it as being a threat or a dangerous section of the Atlantic. But as it turns out, it was because of those winds. That kind of, I don't want to say it was a storm, but it was a wild, wild, wild night. And they kind of, I had to turn now, so I was obviously going north all day and those winds were helping me, but now I have to turn east and row in directly into Galway Bay. So now, instead of the wind being behind me, they're on my side and they're just hitting the side of the boat and they're just pushing me towards the north side of Galway Bay, the Galway coast. And no matter what I did, I couldn't help but been blown. I just didn't have the power to work against that wind. It was, as I said, it was wild and it was very exposed. Once I got out of the lee of Inisheer, and there was a funnel of wind that was kind of coming up by the mainland and between Inisheer, that kind of 7 kilometer gap, and I had to get past that, and my goal was to get inside Blackhead, which is the headland on the southern side, the Clare side of Galway Bay, and that would give me some shelter from those winds. But whatever I did, I just didn't have the power to work against them. I just all the night, very, very tense hours. At this point, I'd only slept 5 hours in 3 days since I came off Para-Anchor just north of Dingle. So I was absolutely exhausted. Like every cell in my body wanted to sleep, but I knew I couldn't. There was no moon, as I said, so it was pitch black at that point when I started rowing into Galway Bay. Big waves on my beam, so threat of capsize all the time. So that's my number one threat, and I have to be very aware. And if I can see the wave coming, I can just do 2 little strokes and I can help kind of mitigate capsize by just putting the nose far enough into the wave to take the brunt of it, rather than the wave hitting me flat on the side of the boat and probably turning me. But it's pitch black, right? So I'm trying to identify these waves in the darkness of dark. So all I can see is a little kind of white line at the top of the wave between the body of water below it and the horizon above it. And I'm like, it's so stressful trying to figure that out, like trying to look at these walls of water coming at you. There's no perception because it's so dark. And now on my other side, on my right-hand side, the longer the night goes on, the closer I get to land. And the closer those street lights and all the kind of confusing lights of the mainland, I get to them. So yeah, on and on and on, hours and hours, just like every cell in my body wants to go to sleep, but I just keep telling myself I can't. I'm just trying to make the reevaluation every minute, 2 minutes based off the information I'm getting and what I can do. So my plan is to see if I could get into Spittal. That wasn't an option. Then I was thinking Barna. And if Barna is not an option, I'll keep rowing in deeper into the bay and I'll try and get to Black Rock, which is kind of close to the city. I'll put down the anchor. I kind of very much know that coastline. So I was pretty confident I could do that. So Barna was my next thing. I was going to have a look at Barna in terms of like the pier from afar, obviously, and see if it was negotiable. It would have been in the lee of Blackhead, so that was the big thing. But I never got that far because, as I said, perception is very, very difficult. And I felt at that point I was further out from land than I was. And I'm looking on my left at the waves, looking on my right at the coastline, and I just catch out the corner of my eye 2 rocks right behind me at Furbo. So I tried to flick the boat around like 270 degrees and row straight out into those big rolling waves that had been hitting me all night. And I punched through the first one. I couldn't believe that I actually made that turn so quickly, because I was only about 10 seconds from hitting those rocks. But I made that turn quick enough. And then I felt, do you know what? You're getting away, like a modicum of perception that I was getting away from those rocks. And then I came to the second wave, and you have to have the nose absolutely flush perpendicular with the wave to punch through it. If you don't, the power of the wave will just grab the side of the boat and turn it sideways. And that's what happened. I wasn't strong enough in terms of my line into the wave. I was just showing a little bit of the nose because they're so strong in that weather. Turned me sideways, capsized me, like a 180 degree capsize, broke the oar on that side. And that was that. 30 seconds later, I kind of drifted up onto the rocks, and that was my, that's how I arrived in County Galway.
Yes. But I mean, just incredible. I mean, it's edge of the seat stuff just to hear what's happened there. But in the pitch dark, in the cold water, up onto the rocks. And, what struck me as well was, which I guess you don't think about, but makes perfect sense, is you didn't have the ability to walk at that point, right? So when you hit the rocks, get yourself up off those rocks. Just incredible. Well, look, I know that... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to kind of give people a bit of a color around that. Yeah, like, so basically I had to get off the boat because it was getting smashed around in the rocks, and it was a bit dangerous, I felt. So I was able to kind of slide down. So I was in kind of the rock pools and the seaweed, and I wasn't in any threat in terms of the actual water. So it was safe for me to get down. I felt around at one point to see how deep it was, and I could touch the bottom in the rock pool. So it was grand. I get off. And then when I get off, my body just collapses it's like I was a jellyfish with no kind of structure. And I tried to get up, and I could kind of get up on my legs, but then I was bent over at my waist because I didn't have any confidence in my legs taking my full weight. So my hands were on the ground. And then I tried to take a step, and I couldn't. I didn't have the strength or the confidence to do that. So I just went on my knees and I crawled away. And then after about 20 minutes of crawling, 2 guards came because I had thrown out one of the emergency beacons and it had gone off, and the Coast Guard, Valentia, had signalled to all the emergency services. So the 2 guards came and they found me and they helped me up to the Garda car. And yeah, that was as I said, that was the arrival.
Yeah. I mean, I'd encourage people, I listen to your podcast, Deep Roots. I encourage people to have a listen to that for a detailed breakdown, including snaffling one of the Garda lunches, which I'm sure would taste it all the better. But I mean, it's just incredible to hear the story. I mean, incredible to meet you firsthand, Damien, and an absolute pleasure. I know you have longer term objectives. I'm sure other adventures coming up. But in terms of people, following your story, I know you're on most of the social media platforms, and most recently TikTok, which seems to have just completely blown up for you, which is fantastic to see all those views. The very first video that you put out, so incredible. But just for listeners, what are your social channels? How can they kind of keep in contact, and can they contact you if they're interested in either engaging you or learning more?
Yeah, so I suppose the best place to find out everything is damianbrown.com.
Okay.
That has all the links to Deep Roots. Like if you want to follow this, I put a lot of effort and time into sending these dispatches from the ocean, so people were kind of able to. It wasn't live; it was 3 or 4 days behind, and one stage it got to about 10 days behind. But still, I was putting a lot of effort into sharing the story, because I think there's great connection to be made in somebody going through something like that, what the reality of something like that elicits, and me sharing it just as kind of authentically as I can. So I put a lot of time into that. So Deep Roots is all the episodes are up there. I think there was like 90 odd episodes over the course of the 112 days. Yeah, my social media channels, like I'm kind of most active on Instagram. So my handle is @AuldStock, AULD_stock. But you'll find that all on damianbrown.com anyway.
Great. Well, Damien, we'll certainly be following your story from Asset Class. Hopefully, we might be able to play a part in some future adventure. We'd love that. But I want to thank you again for the incredible, meeting that we had with you and the rest of the team at our kickoff, and obviously on the podcast today. I wish you nothing but continued success with all of your endeavors, and the very authentic, telling of your story here today is just, it's been an absolute pleasure. So thanks very much, Damien. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much. Lovely words. Appreciate that. Continued success to yourselves, and I'm sure we'll be in contact again.
Well, we promised you quite a story there, and Damien didn't disappoint. Clearly, just an outstanding individual. I have to say, just very humble. A couple of occasions that we've had to talk, an incredible guy, an incredible story, and we're glad to be able to share that with you on this podcast. Speaking of which, we will have a monthly podcast. Hope you enjoyed this first one and that you'll stick with us for future podcasts. Share the word as well. Anybody you know in the private capital space, or indeed anybody who's got an interest in human stories, will be joined monthly by leaders in the private capital space, the private equity and venture capital space. We'll also have early stage companies and perhaps some growth companies join us just to share their experiences on the fundraising journey and more. So thanks very much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you on future episodes. Bye.